Coach Robb podcast, answering questions and eliminating frustrations about health, wellness, and performance since 1987.
Welcome to the Coach Robb podcast. Robb Beams. I'm your co-host, Dan Colvin. Robb, how you doing today, bud?
Hey, I am doing great. Thank you so much for being willing to jump onto this podcast show.
Yeah.
The fact that we're going to be doing 2 of them a month is very exciting, and I can't thank you enough for agreeing to put up with me for Lord only knows how long.
Yeah, I know this is going to be awesome. Episode 1 of 2023. We have a lot of cool topics that we're going to get into over the course of this next year. We've been planning for this. This has been in the works. So I'm really excited. I think the listeners and viewers are going to be really excited as well.
Yeah, I definitely want to welcome back all those that have been following us for the last, 10 years now on the Coach Robb podcast show. It's been under a couple different titles in the past, and we've got it underneath our own ownership here. So there will be no more lags in the consistency of shows that come out. And for those of you that may be new, just want to introduce ourselves. My name is Coach Robb Beams, and I've been a human performance coach now for 37 years. And I like to cover everything that's relevant to health, wellness, and performance. So when you come to these podcasts, obviously we're going to be having a subject that we're mainly going to be speaking about on each show. But you may find that we may cross-germinate and go down a few bunny trails, but it's only because of what we've heard from our viewers. That's why we call this the People's Podcast. And we would encourage you, while we're getting this first show off the ground, if at any time you have a question for us, I would encourage you to please email me. Email me at contact@coachrobb.com, because like I always like to tease you, Dan, nobody wants to see me or hear my voice, but what they do want is solutions to frustrations. And that's definitely what this whole Coach Robb podcast show is all about. For those listeners that are very into their athletics, we are going to be doing a second show every month. It's going to be the Coach Robb Performance Podcast. It's not going to be just involved with one sport, because strength, flexibility, nutrition, sports psychology, injuries, biomechanics goes across every and all sports. So we'll be doing that as our second show every month. And so I just want to welcome back all those that have been hitting us up, what's going on. And for those that are new, welcome, and it's great to have you.
And I'll introduce myself as well, Robb, because your listeners may not know exactly who I am. My name is Dan. I go by Toolman Dan. I do the Main Event Moto podcast with Daniel Blair. We're a motocross, supercross podcast as well. So super excited, Robb, to join you. You and I have worked together in the past. We've done some performance camps together. I've raced and ridden motocross all my life. And I'm really excited about this opportunity.
Well, I can't thank you enough. And I think not because of the time of the calendar year, I think it's always interesting to dive into that subject of that dreaded body fat and being able to kind of decipher the just an incredible amount of misinformation that's floating around out there. So my goal after this first show together is that people have a better understanding on what is true body fat reduction, significant differentiating factor there, which we'll talk about here in the show.
Yeah, well, I was going to say it's the new year, right? It's that time that everybody decides that they're going to make a change, right? It's January 1st, I'm going to start going to the gym. I'm going to start losing some weight, and that's a great segue into our first topic in episode 1, and that's weight loss or lower body fat. Which one do you want? 5 steps to melting body fat and not dehydrating. And I think that's the key thing, right? Because we have a lot of water weight in us, and I think you'll talk about that. And being dehydrated obviously is an issue, and you want to make sure that you're hydrated, but you also want to lose weight. So maybe you can talk us through that.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I think it's very interesting when you look at a lot of the quote unquote diet programs that are out there. What's their big selling point? You will definitely lose 10 pounds in the first week. And you notice that they go to pounds instead of going to percentage of body fat, because most people, they can't differentiate between the two. So they just rely on the scale as an indicator. Am I fat or am I lean? And I want to get this conversation started by saying, please do not use the scale for body fat. Whether you're using a high-end digital scale, you have to recognize that they just use electric impedance. So if you're dehydrated, you're going to have a very low body fat percentage. If you're properly hydrated, it could inflate your number and put you into 10 or 15% higher than you really are. The most accurate way to be able to measure your percentage of body fat is through calipers, tape measures. If you have the opportunity and you could do submersion, that's the ultimate way to measure body fat. However, 99% of our listeners don't have access to submersion. And that's what I want to talk about today is when you look at the idea, look at the title of the web of this entire show. Do you want to melt body fat or do you just want to get a certain number on the scale? And that's why I wanted to tie the two together. And that's why I use the word body fat and dehydration, because when you look at what the scale is telling you, you've got to be able to read in between the lines and recognize that dehydration does not essentially represent body fat percentages. Now, when I say that out loud, people go, well, isn't that quite obvious? Yes, it is. But if you looked and talked to individuals and listened to their frustrations, which Dan, you and I talked about this off the air, the frustration level is at an all-time high because you'll have people that are on a calorically restricted diet. You'll have them training extremely hard multiple times per week, and they're actually gaining weight. And we'll get more into that here in just a little bit. But I wanted to make sure when we get the conversation started, if you come to me and you say, Rob, I want to be leaner, that's completely different than saying I want to be dehydrated. And the approach has to match the desirable outcome. And that's the most important component. The one thing that I want people to understand right out of the blocks is when these different programs recommend or they advocate that they're going to reduce body weight by 10 pounds in a week. What's the old saying say? As the old saying goes, Dan, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. And I appreciate everybody giving us another 45 to 60 minutes so that we can start to decipher and break down kind of a process that we look at in regards to body fat. If you don't have a piece of paper, obviously, if you're listening to this podcast and you're driving, I don't want you to take notes. But if you're watching us on YouTube or if you're relaxing at a place where you can take notes, I would encourage you to get out a piece of paper because we're going to walk you through some things to jot down. If you're watching this on YouTube, we're going to have some graphical illustrations because I completely respect that some people learn by hearing, some by seeing, some by listening and writing it down simultaneously. And we want to make sure we check off all those boxes.
Hey, Rob, one thing I wanted to ask you is, and I want to make sure that I'm understanding this properly, when some of these other diets and these other programs out there, they have this, you'll lose 10 pounds in 1 week. Are you saying that a lot of that is they dehydrate you and that's how you're losing that weight so quickly?
You're exactly right. Since you went there, let's go ahead and just jump on that subject. If you have a piece of paper, what I want you to do is write from left to right on your piece of paper. The very first thing that you've got to keep in mind is I want you to have your snacks predominantly consist of fruits and vegetables. Now, for some people, that may seem idealistic. In future shows together, we'll talk about why am I such a big fan of fruits and vegetables? And it's not just because they're healthy for you. There are so many additional benefits that essentially don't get discussed. And I think as we go through these subjects, it's going to help our listeners understand, hey, I should eat fruit and vegetables because of more than just saying they're healthy for you. But we'll get into that in an additional show. On your piece of paper, I want you to write down the words fruits and vegetables. We pretty much can all visualize eating an apple or snacking on something that's a fruit or a vegetable, whatever your favorite is. When you eat that fruit or vegetable, it's called a carbohydrate. So on your piece of paper, literally write edible carbohydrate. It could be a piece of bread, by the way, it's carbohydrate. But what happens is your body converts an edible carbohydrate into glycogen. Now, before the listeners check out and go, okay, he's getting all scientific, I'm going to check out. Please be open-minded. The word glycogen represents stored sugar. It's very simple. Now, on your piece of paper, you eat a carbohydrate, it gets converted to glycogen. So it's like a linear process. Underneath the word glycogen, I want you to write down liver, and then in parentheses, put brain, and then muscles, put in parentheses, movement. So let's walk through this. You're eating a carbohydrate, your body converts it to stored sugar known as glycogen. Notice that I said the liver feeds the brain. So if you're at work all day or you're using your brain a lot, like when you're racing, a lot of people don't realize when we start to get that mental fogginess, it's because our liver is depleted. Our muscles are not. That's why we're still able to keep moving. We're able to keep racing. But if the liver, so think about it, inside the human body, you've got two gas tanks, one for your brain and the one for all other bodily functions, figuratively speaking. So you eat a carbohydrate, it gets converted to stored glycogen. Now, this is where the math comes in. And Dan, your question was right on the money. When your body converts what you eat to something that it stores, it retains 2.8 grams of water in that conversion process. So for the listeners, visualize you have an apple in your hand. It's going to get stored in your body, in your liver and your muscles. So for that storage to happen, you retain water. You see how that linear process goes from what you eat to what you store. And as part of that conversion rate, you retain water. If I take that equation and I reverse it, this is exactly why these diet programs can advocate that you'll lose 10 pounds in a week. Simply don't eat carbohydrates. So when you're being told to go protein dominant or almost protein exclusive, there's no fancy science behind it. Think about it, Dan. If I were to write a book and I were to explain what we just shared with our listeners, it would be one sentence or maybe one illustration on one page. Book's over. Because you now know the trick to, hey, if I'm going to guarantee a 10-pound water loss in a week, which they don't call it, they just say lose 10 pounds in a week. Well, goodness, I can park you in a parking lot during the summer here in Florida and dehydrate you. Am I going to charge you $29.99 for a book? Got to be careful. You've got to recognize that. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist type of guy, but it's one of those, if you've been struggling with weight loss for years, you've got to ask yourself, why hasn't it worked? Well, they've never explained the science behind it. So Dan, when you make that little, a relatively benign comment, it is literally why we have a multi-billion-dollar weight loss industry, because they don't explain the science behind it. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense.
It totally does. And I think one of the things is these people, they go on these diets, they lose this weight, and what is the ramifications of these quick weight loss diets? Does the weight typically come back quick? Like what is the ramifications of going that route versus the route that that we're going to walk the listeners through?
Well, the ramifications are quite huge. If you want to go to the very, very extreme, and then we can slowly come backwards. If you know anybody, or if you're experiencing symptoms associated with Epstein-Barr virus, EBV, chronic fatigue syndrome, Addison's disease, unfortunately, you've got to recognize that those titles are blood-related diseases. That's like you said, Dan, taking the body to the point of exhaustion, to where literally the body is now diseased. I said this previously on other podcasts. Our goal as a company and as a human performance company, you got to remember, when I say human performance, I can't ever get you to performance unless I have a foundation of health. That's why we always put it in that order. The thing to keep in mind is, why do you let yourself go to the point of depletion before we go to the doctor to get blood work to then get a diagnosis? So what we always encourage with our athletes is have the blood work drawn every 3 to 4 months, because as we sit here on this pod together, we have to recognize that the human body that I'm sitting with right now and our listeners are sitting here with is a byproduct of what you've eaten and what kind of activity, physical activity, balancing of stress, and the amount of food that you've eaten in the last 6 months. How much food, how much sleep, and your ability to manage stress. When you get your blood work and your blood work is out of range, you're out of range on B6, B12, iron, zinc, iodine, whatever it may be, stop and think about what your blood panel is telling you. You're out of range on the elements that create energy, that allow the body to recover and allow the body to adapt to stress. So if we go to a bloodborne disease like Epstein-Barr, what is that telling you? You've run the body to the point of depletion. And unfortunately, Dan, that's when people are they're being told by their physicians, you know what you need to do? You need to eat more food and you need to sleep more. You need to reduce stress in your life. And just another thread of thought, what I find interesting is we've had, it seems to be mainly in the female marathon market more than anything else, is we will have athletes that will present themselves to us very, very frustrated because they're running 75 to 100 miles a week. Their previous coach has them on a calorically restricted diet. high intensity training, high volume, and their percentage of body fat is going up. How frustrating would that be? And I'm sure some of that that probably resonates with some of our listeners. I'm just pulling things that have come across our office front door, and I want to make sure that after today's show together, our listeners don't fall into that trap anymore. Hopefully, identify it before it becomes a problem.
Yeah, so one of the goals I think to losing the weight is you want to be hydrated, and not dehydrated, but yet you want to get leaner as well, and leaner meaning less body fat, more muscle mass. I think that would be the ultimate goal, right? To doing this thing healthy.
Well, and that's why we called the show the way we did. We need to differentiate between, if you come to me and my staff and you tell me that you want to drop body fat, then everything, and we're going to talk about it on the show here today, then everything we do needs to be towards what your goal is, and that's drop body fat. Now, particularly for the females that are listening, it's interesting that when they hear strength training as an imperative component of losing body fat, they get a little bit concerned because they immediately picture a bodybuilder. That doesn't necessarily, depending on how you load the body up, or load the muscles up, dictates the way the body grows, the amount of muscle. But it's imperative that our listeners understand that muscle weighs more than fat, but fat takes up more space. So when you come to me and my staff and you say, I want to be leaner, okay, we're going to lift weights. Because when you increase the amount of muscle mass inside a muscle spindle cell, all the things that make up the fibers of a muscle, that's where you burn your body fat. That's where you burn sugar. So the more lean muscle you have, the more efficient you are at burning body fat, first and foremost. The other side of the equation is if muscle weighs more than fat, it's okay that the scale is going up because muscle weighs more than fat. We said it a little bit ago. What becomes important is look at where you hold on to your body fat. Hips, belly, wherever you hold on to body fat, the goal is that when you decide to exercise, that you train at an intensity that leverages stored body fat for fuel. Very important. You're measuring progress by the way the body composition changes, not based on what the scale is telling you. What we say with all of our clients is the morning weight gives you an indication of inflammation and swelling, and it's my job to help you decipher, is that coming from exercise or food sensitivities? And then your body weight at night is telling us proper hydration levels. Are you drinking enough during the day, and are you offsetting enough for what you lose in the form of sweat?
So let me ask you this real quick, because
Yeah.
I wanted the body weight thing.
Yeah.
People weigh themselves at different times during the day, like you just explained. What would be because I weigh myself in the morning, which
Mm-hmm.
is, I don't know if that's the correct way. Would you be getting a more accurate weight reading at night, even though it may look quote unquote worse if you're trying to lose weight?
Your question has a lot of meat on the bone. Your morning weight in the morning with an empty bladder is always going to be accurate. So when you say, are you doing it incorrectly? Absolutely not. This is where consistency of data collection is absolutely imperative, because if you jump on the scale in the morning at 190 pounds, has 190, 189, has 191 kind of been your norm for 6 or 8 weeks? Because if it jumps from 190 to 196, that's inflammation and swelling. For those of you that have a piece of paper, if you go to Google Guide, they're going to say that a pound of fat is approximately 3,500 calories. So if you jumped up 4 pounds yesterday, you stepped on the scale this morning, Dan, and you're up 4 pounds, did you eat 14,000 excessive calories yesterday? That's what just like the way that we looked at that equation, you eat a carbohydrate, converts to glycogen, you retain water. If you're going to use the scale, and I don't encourage you to use the scale for body fat for the reasons we've already talked about, but let's say somebody really does focus in on the scale. Okay, then let's use the math both forwards and backwards. If you're going to tell me that a pound of fat is 3,500 calories and you're up 4 pounds and you're going to use calories, it mathematically doesn't equate. Now let's go the other way, Dan. Your morning body weight every day needs to be pretty relevant to what you've seen the last 6 to 8 weeks. Your evening weight should always be up 3 to 5 pounds, because that tells me you're properly hydrated. Fruits and vegetables, high in water. You're hitting your basal metabolic needs for water, which is half your body weight in pounds. divide it by 2, and that's how many ounces of water. So a 200-pound person should drink 100 ounces of water spread out over 8 to 10 hours.
And that's a
Now you're
huge
hydrated.
misconception as well, because
Very,
most
very
people
big.
say drink a gallon of water a day. And in a lot of cases, that's actually very harmful for somebody that does not weigh much, like a 100-pound female. That would be detrimental to them.
You're exactly right. My wife weighs 94 pounds. And ironically, when we were out doing a performance camp with you in California, we went to a local gym and they had these 8.5 by 11s all over the gym that said, drink a gallon of water a day, drink a gallon of water a day. So for the listeners, let's do the math backwards. The only person that should be drinking a gallon of water a day is someone who weighs 256 pounds, because a gallon of water is 128 ounces. So I take the person's body weight, divide it by 2, and that's how many ounces they should consume over the course of the day. And Dan, you bring up a very good point. If you overhydrate yourself, you dilute the electrolytes, specifically sodium in the blood, that's a condition known as hyponatremia that can kill you. More people die of hyponatremia than dehydration. And we could do a whole show on this, the stop gaps that the body has. But you're right. My wife at 94 pounds, if she drinks 128, she's literally flushing her system of electrolytes. It's going to make her physically sick. Now, you go back to the other side of the equation. We've talked about, why did you come and present yourself to me and my staff? You want to lose body fat. Okay. Well, as we said, I'm not going to allow you to become dehydrated, because we just solved the first problem. Take your body weight, divide it by 2, in pounds, by the way, consume that over 8 to 10 hours. Now you're hydrated. When you go through your day, you should always weigh more at night than you were in the morning. Why? Because fruits and vegetables, high in water, you're properly hydrated. You know how many times, and this is I'm going to kind of tell a story here I have been fired more times than I can count, because people got irritated in the first month that their body weight went up. And they said, Rob, we hired you to decrease our body fat percentages. What's interesting is their tape measure and their caliper numbers demonstrated that they lost body fat, but because the scale went up, they couldn't handle it. And I get it. For those of you that have struggled with the scale, I am not minimizing it. Dan, you mentioned something earlier. Is it detrimental to the body when you go up and down and up and down and up and down with all these different diets that are out there? Well, isn't it ironic that it's called yo-yo dieting?
Yeah.
So I want the listeners to think about this. You start a quote unquote commercial diet that's out there. You start at 200 pounds. You eat like a bird. What happens is, because of the caloric restriction, you're not eating as much food, so you retain less water, so you lose weight, and you go, yay, I'm losing weight. That's cool. You're not losing body fat, but we already talked about that. So what happens is a person goes from 200 down to 190, has severe headaches because they're starving. They're not getting enough calories, so they're not sleeping good. So they go, screw this. I'm going to go back to eating my normal way. Well, what they don't realize is, over that time, and there's no exact science, but you can Google it, and I'm sure you get a lot of opinions. What happens is the metabolism will start to match the caloric intake. So now here you are cutting calories, you slow your metabolism down. You go, no, Rob, I'm exercising. I don't care that you're exercising. The body has been created in a way that it will match what it needs to survive. So the metabolism slows down. Well, wait, Dan says, all right, I'm tired of eating like a bird. He goes back to eating what he normally does. Well, his metabolism is down here at 190, and he's eating like he is at 200. So you go from 200 to 190, and then you go to 210. You go, doggone it. I only worked when I was starving myself. Starve yourself from 210 down to 200. You get headaches. You can't sleep. You get tired. You go, screw this. You go to 220. That's called the yo-yo diet. And that's why it's a multi-billion-dollar business. So when you talk about, if you want to increase your ability to burn body fat, lift weights so you build muscle. You're more efficient at body fat. Make sure that you're properly hydrated. And then when you do go to exercise, you need to make sure that you're exercising correctly. And when we get into the subject of exercise, this is where I tend to be, let's call myself controversial, because I want our listeners to understand that there's more to somebody just telling you to do high interval intensity training. Acronym is HIIT training. There's more to it. Textbook, yes, HIIT training by textbook does work, but in a little bit here, I want to explain why I'm not a big fan of HIIT training and why I've had tremendous success helping athletes and individuals lose a lot of body fat, not doing it with HIIT training. But we'll explain that here in a little bit.
Yeah, let's recap this part one of the pod here and really break it down, right? It's you want to lose some weight, you don't want to become dehydrated, you want to melt the body fat. That's the ultimate goal. We've identified that the person needs to drink half their weight in water. So if you weigh 200 pounds, it's 100 ounces of water. Yep. And if you want to lose the body fat and gain some muscle mass, obviously lift weights, things like that. Let's talk about.
Let me just add one quick thing. The reason why we want your body weight to be 3 to 5 pounds heavier, 1.5 kilos heavier every night is because do you notice in the morning when you wake up, your body weight's gone back down? All the bodily functions through the evening causes you to lose water. So if you weigh 200, and Dan, I'm only using 200 because you're so tall. If you're 200 pounds in the morning, and then you go to bed at 195, and then you go through all your bodily functions, and you wake up the next morning at 192, and then at the end of the day, you're 190. By Monday to Friday, you're simply dehydrated. Yeah. But people jump up and down. They're like, yay, the scale's going down. No, my friend, you're dehydrated. If you want to challenge it, look at your headaches. Look at your inability to sleep. Look at your irritability. Look at your suppressed appetite. And the list goes on and on. Remember, I want you to put your body, and I've done a podcast on this previously, I want you to put your body in a mode of growing, thriving, and not surviving is what I called it last time. Listeners that are with us today, stop and ask yourself, are you on struggle bus? Are you always tired and lethargic? Well, maybe you're starting to figure out why.
Yeah, and I'll tell a quick story also. And we're going to talk, hydration is like, for me, because Coach Robb, that's my biggest downfall is I just don't drink enough water, and it's to my own fault. And you and I have talked about this with the chronic headaches and I do it to myself. But when I'm riding and when I'm at the track, I never know if I'm drinking enough water. And when it's hot out, you get dehydrated. So, one of those things that you told me to do was to weigh myself, before I start riding. And at the end of the day, weigh myself again, and that will tell me if I, drank enough water or not during the day. So, and that has helped me when I'm at the track. But I'll admit, Coach Robb, I'm still not good at drinking water during the day.
Well, and that's okay. The idea is I want our listeners to understand the why behind it. They're going to see this be a theme for every show that we ever put together. The idea here is please don't just say, Robb said drink half my body weight in ounces of water. Understand why. So like for yourself, Dan, and I would encourage anybody who's listening, is buy an inexpensive scale from Target. Take it to wherever you go. Take it beside the pool. Take it to the racetrack. Take it to the running track. Take it to the baseball field. Take it to the soccer field. Because how are you supposed to know, Dan, you just said it a few minutes ago, you need to know how much you're losing before we can determine how much you should consume. I know that sounds, again, a little elementary, but I see people that are just walking around soccer fields, guzzling water bottle after water bottle after water bottle. And at what point do we hit an oversaturation point? We'll do a separate show on the science of sports drinks. It's based on carbohydrate concentration numbers, sodium, potassium levels. We're fortunate enough we have Energy Fuel as one of our sponsors here. And that product is designed around intensity and duration, the molecules of the carbohydrate. But if you look at the concentration rate of the carbs, it's always going to be at the optimum percentage for absorption purposes. So, and let me just remind everybody, if you're watching this on YouTube, go into the description box below. I've got a hyperlink to an entire plethora of Coach Robb resources. And the one that we're talking about right now is a sweat rate calculator. When you click on that link, you can check off 10 or 15 different things that are available for you. That's where you'll find the sweat rate calculator. By the way, we don't use your email. You won't be getting our newsletter. You only get our newsletter if you opt in for it. But whatever specific resource you're asking for, we will send it to you immediately. But here's the key. The resource is of no value unless you're going to use it, and then you're going to adjust your behavior off of it. So Dan, like we did with you, weigh yourself before and after. How much fluid have you taken in? If you're using a Garmin heart rate monitor, you know your intensity for your ride session. You know the air temperature. you know what you weighed before and after, it's very easy for us to put together your sweat rate. And I hope that people start to understand, right? We have all these conversations about hydration. And what's the big question? Well, how much should I drink? It's got to be calculated for you based on your height, your weight, your activity, duration, intensity, air temperature, humidity, and the calculator does it all for you. You literally plug in 3 numbers. That's how
Yeah.
user-friendly this is. So I'm glad, Dan, I appreciate your honesty saying, hey, look, I'm still on struggle bus with it, because I'm sure a lot of our listeners are as well. I don't like the taste of it. I don't like, it's too bland for me or whatever. I get it. I totally respect that. Quite honestly, that's why Energy Fuel has a light line, because people use it to flavor the water.
Yeah,
So again, there's a lot of science behind it.
and honestly, that the Energy Fuel does, for me, it makes drinking water a little bit more friendly. I just don't like the taste of water. So,
Well, and I want to make sure that the listeners, especially those that are new, I developed Energy Fuel based on how long are you going to use it? And we're going to talk about this in a future show, because there's an inverse relationship between intensity and duration. So Energy Fuel Boost is for 1 hour or less. Energy Fuel is for 1 to 3 hours, and Energy Fuel Boost is for 3 hours and above. So the carbohydrate molecule changes. We put a lactic acid buffer in the high intensity, and we add more electrolytes, because that's what you lose in sweating. So here we are talking about being hydrated versus being, when you're sitting here telling me you want to lose body fat. That's why we always start this conversation with, are you addicted to what the scale says? Because the scale is showing you hydration in the evening and inflammation and swelling in the morning, period. Body measurements taking every 6 weeks when the body is under a week of low volume and intensity. So the inflammation and swelling associated with exercise is to a minimum. Well, we're not giving away any secrets. The idea here is you came to us saying you want to lose body fat, then let's burn body fat, not just dehydrate you. Very important.
Let's talk about the principles of energy and energy matrix. Where is your workout calories actually coming from? There's 3 sources of energy: stored protein, stored sugar, which is glycogen, we covered that, and then stored fat.
This right here, I'm hoping for the listeners, is going to be the aha moment. Because if you go to Google and you look it up, the first thing it Google's, if you go to Google and you type in, does low intensity burn more body fat? It will come up and it will literally tell you that yes, low intensity training burns more body fat. If you have a piece of paper, I want you to take and draw an integer line. So literally just draw a straight line, put 1% on the far left and put 100% on the far right. That's essentially, what is your intensity when you're training, when you're racing? Above 1%, put fat, and above 100%, put sugar. That's why I term this the energy matrix. For those of you that are into motors and you run 2-stroke motors, you know that you do an oil to gasoline mixture. That's the way I want you to look at the energy matrix. You just said it, Dan. All of our energy comes from one of 3 sources: stored fat, stored protein, or stored sugar. That's just the way it is. Once those systems become depleted, then it starts relying on what's on the outside of the body. Protein in the most clinical setting is only going to produce 15% of total energy. So we don't really worry much about it, because 85% of that lion's share is going to come from a mixture of carbohydrates and body fat, stored carbo, as you said, glycogen, and fat. So let's go back to the beginning of, you came into my office saying, Rob, I want to lose body fat. Perfect. When you go to train, keep the intensity on the low side, because you're going to be burning a predominant amount. Because remember, you're never burning exclusively one or the other. It's always a mixture. That's why we call it a matrix. It's always a mixture of those 3. For those of you that are listening to this in a podcast, I would encourage you to go over to YouTube, because I'm going to have an illustration up on the screen so you can see when your heart rate goes up, you'll see that there's an inverse relationship. As the heart rate goes up, more sugar is burnt. That comes from your liver and your muscles, and less body fat is being utilized. Well, let's stop and back the conversation up. Do you want to burn body fat, or do you want to burn stored sugar? Because if you're a racer, you've got to be able to go long at a fast rate of speed, and you've got to be able to go short at a fast rate of speed. Well, that's a dichotomy for the human body. If you're, again, let's go back to what you said. Are you Wanting to lose body fat? If so, lift weights and bring the intensity down. Now, this is where I become controversial. There's going to be people that are educated and they say, nope, it's got to be guts to the wall, high intensity is going to burn more net calories. How many of our listeners are getting 8 to 9 hours of sleep every night? They're getting 2 hours of deep sleep. They're awake less than 10 minutes. How many of our athletes, how many of our listeners are getting adequate amount of sleep every night and eating enough food and have a low level of stress in their body?
I'm going to guess a very, very low percentage, Coach Robb, because
that's exactly it.
Because there was one thing that you talked about, actually two, sleep. I don't get enough sleep. I think the majority of Americans, people in this world, do not get enough sleep. Absolutely. And then stress, right? We all have stress, which we're going to talk about. But
yep. Well, and that's why I have a tremendous library in my office. I've got degrees in human physiology. Trust me, I understand the textbook explanation of, okay, if you do high intensity interval training, it's going to break down fat molecules, fat oxidation. You can go down this whole diatribe and explain it to me. That's great. 99% of society is not coming into a workout rested, fed, hydrated. And now for those of you that are in the world of motors, if I have a motor that's got 100 hours on it, am I going to take it to a track that's got a lot of elevation and it's going to go from full load? And when's the motor going to grenade? As soon as it leaves the ground, right? So why I would be completely irresponsible to take you, the listener, who's already fatigued, overworked, underslept, underfed, underhydrated. We're not a helicopter friend here. I'm asking you to look at it in the real world of application. If you want to burn body fat, bring the intensity down. Now, again, I'm going to get people that will argue with me and say, yeah, but if you go guts to the wall, you burn more total calories. Incorrect, grasshopper. Yes, on paper, you're going to burn more total calories. And this is what I think is so funny about Google. If you look at Google, the very first explanation says low intensity training, you will leverage body fat for fuel. Everybody agrees to that. And then the very next thing that Google says is, but you'll burn more total calories if you go at a higher intensity. Well, that's kind of a Captain Obvious statement, right? You're going to get better fuel mileage in your truck under load at 55 miles an hour than you are at 85.
Yep.
You're going to burn more fuel. Okay, we get that. Let's go back to the beginning of the conversation. Did you come to me saying that you wanted to be more efficient at burning stored sugar, or do you want to be more efficient at burning stored body fat? And there's the differentiating variable. Yes, there is a time and a place for high intensity training, and it only stems from when our listeners are getting enough food, getting enough sleep, and getting the stress category under control. Because the number one reason why athletes gain, and not just athletes, everybody that's listening to this podcast and watching us on YouTube, every single person has to get stress under control if they want to drop body fat. So we could do a whole show on cortisol and other things, but it's beyond the scope of this initial webinar together.
So essentially, if you're wanting to lose some body fat, you're wanting to lose some weight, you're just an average citizen wanting to lose some weight, which I think there's a lot of people like that, right? I think we all would agree that we want to lose a little bit of weight. You're probably better off going for a moderate walk, right? A slow or a high, fast-paced walk versus a full-out sprint, right?
That's right.
And again, that's a misconception, because you go to the gym and you see these people on the row or just rowing away and just sweating their their guts out, and you're like, oh, what are you trying to do? Oh man, I got to lose some weight. Well, you're actually doing the wrong workout for that, potentially, right?
Yeah, and I want the listeners to zoom out to 10,000 feet. How many people have a disdain for the gym? And why is that? Because the gym is miserable. Why is it miserable? Because you go there and you think you have to smash yourself. So I always get a lot of raised eyebrows when I say, I want you to go to the gym and I want you to pull back on the intensity. And they get a little bit upset. They're like, wait, I'm here to lose weight. Okay, let's look at the principles of physiology. Let's look at the amount of stress that you're under personally, professionally, financially. We're only discussing the element of athletic, but your body can only handle so much stress. Now, you could look at it. Now, we're just keep going out and keep bringing down lower and lower and lower to the specifics. When you present yourself and say that you want to burn body fat, then make sure that the intensity is at the right end of the spectrum, the lower end, so that you leverage stored body fat. Now you get a bunch of fringe benefits. Low intensity training is more enjoyable. If you can kind of knock that little negative canary off, that it's actually a productive workout, even though you're not, like you say, about to puke. So now you start to enjoy fitness. What happens when you enjoy it? You're going to go to the gym more often. So now your consistency goes up. Now for those, think about this as a continuum. You'll never get to high level performance until you have a foundation of health. Sounds a little textbook, sounds a little cliche-ish, but it's not. The number one limiting factor on a high end of athletic performance, believe it or not, is aerobic function, not lactate tolerance. So for those of you that are in your sport requires maybe some top end intensity, you're never going to improve that top end intensity until you can build the aerobic base. Again, let's go into the example of those that are listeners that understand motors. If I take a motor, and I'm going to use motorcycle for those of you that aren't in it, we have motorcycle sizes. So if I take, I'm going to use an old illustration because I'm going to assume we all have carburetors on our motors, right? If you go back to the day where you have a big old KX500 and I take a KX85 carburetor and I stuff it on there, the piston size is your strength base. You've got the ability to go really, really fast, but you don't have enough air fuel to fuel that piston. That piston will never do its job. If I reverse that equation, I have a KX65 cylinder, I take a KX500 carburetor and I stuff it on it. Doesn't matter how much air or fuel I put in there, I'm only as strong as the cc's of that piston. Now let's take the whole thing apart. Dan, I'm going to offer you $100 this afternoon. We're going to go out to the field and as I'm going to have a radar gun. And as soon as you hit 100 miles an hour, I'm going to give you $1,000, 10 $100 bills. Here you go. But you have two bikes to choose from. You can either ride a KX85 or you can ride a 500. What are you going to choose?
I'd probably ride the, my heart's saying KX500, right?
Well, and that's where I want people to have a paradigm shift in the way they're looking at this.
Yeah.
Because you'll get some people in the gym that'll say, well, if you want to be able to go really fast at the track, you've got to be able to do high intensity training. That represents about 5% of the total equation. If you're not strong, you can't go fast, size of your piston. If you don't have a good aerobic engine, you can't go fast, size of your carburetor. When I put those two together, what do we start the conversation with today? Start by getting strong. You're going to be more efficient at burning body fat, fringe benefit, right? Because inside the muscle spindle cells, that's where you convert carbs, protein, and fat to energy. Now you're lifting weights. You have more of them, bigger piston. You're doing low intensity training. So now you're building the aerobic engine, size of your carburetor, and it's less intense on the body. It's more enjoyable. Consistency goes up, and heaven forbid you actually enjoy your working out. Now, I want people to write this down. Write down the word antioxidant. And Dan, I want to just show you real quickly how we bring this full circle.
Yeah.
Everybody listening to this probably has heard the word antioxidant in their life at least once. And if I were to say to you, where do antioxidants come from? Maybe half of our listeners would say fruits and vegetables, and you're correct. When you take the heart rate extremely high, think about when you guys, if you drive a car, if you step on the gas, you know that the exhaust pipe is full. If you ride moto or any motorcycle and you twist that throttle, you know that there's a lot more exhaust coming out the back, right? Well, as you bring your heart rate up, metabolic byproduct known as lactic acid, don't have to get worried about the big terminology, just put it always back to your analogy of a motor, car, truck, motorcycle, whatever you enjoy. As you bring the heart rate up, you create a condition known as oxidative stress. For those of you that are a little bit more technical and want to be patient with me for 30 seconds, you take a carbohydrate, you eat it, it gets stored as glycogen. When your body converts it from glycogen to energy, there is a hydrogen ion that is released as part of that chemical process. That hydrogen ion is acidic by nature, and hence we get the word lactic acid. Okay. Well, your heart rate's pinned. Well, check it out. Now, just like your exhaust pipe, you're wide open. You're redlining. You're doing your HIIT training, right? Because everybody keeps telling you that's how you get fast, which is absolutely the opposite. All right. So what happens now is you've got all this oxidative stress in the system. Hence the word oxidative stress is a byproduct of high intensity training. Oxidative stress is what causes black circles under our eyes, crow's feet, dry hair, dry skin. We don't heal from injuries. Immune system, we get sick quite often. We have suppressed appetite. We're not hungry. We can't sleep because you're going wide open all the time. Because somebody has sold you a bill of goods that the only way you can go fast is go guts to the wall every time you train, sport specific or even cross training. It's the absolute opposite. Now, here comes the word antioxidant. Why would I want you to eat a fruit and vegetable? Remember, we were saying there's fringe benefits to fruits and vegetables that go beyond the scope of this first podcast together. Well, you told me you wanted to lose body fat, bring the intensity down, actually enjoy it, leverage more body fat for fuel. And when you eat fruits and vegetables, you offset the oxidative stress of any and all exercise. So when it does come time that we're going to light it up, you have a huge strength base, your piston, you have a huge aerobic engine, your carburetor, and your eating habits already have in place that when the production of oxidative stress, metabolic byproduct, your food just automatically diffuses it. And now you don't get adrenal fatigue. You don't get fatigue related issues. Your food complements your exercise and you've built the foundation. Now, when it's time to do speed work, I'm strong and I have an aerobic engine. So now I can go faster, longer, and my eating habits support high intensity training. It's race season. Boom.
I wanted to back up and the high intensity training, the low intensity training, so on and so forth. How do we analyze that? I mean, how do we come to terms with what is high intensity, what is low intensity? I would assume that it's your heart rate and what zone your heart is in when you're working at. Can you talk a little bit about those heart rate zones and where you would want to stay if you're trying to burn fat?
Absolutely. So if you go to the energy matrix, remember we said the more you're on the low end, the more fuel you're burning, more fat you're burning for primary fuel. For anybody who's followed me for a long period of time, you know I'm a big fan of the Garmin platform. We're proud to have them as a sponsor of the show. And one of the things that I want you to keep in mind is the heart rate zones are dictated by the amount of load that's put on the human body. So like we do a tremendous amount of work in the endurance market. It's actually our largest vertical of business. And if you look at swim, bike, and run in our triathlon segment, running always has the highest heart rate because it's so load bearing. Cycling is going to be below that because it's less load bearing. And then of course, swimming is going to be the lowest because it has zero load bearing. Plus you have the hydrostatic pressure of the water that brings the unoxygenated blood back to the heart. So that's why your heart rate's always lower. By the way, it's why I'm a big advocate of swimming, because it's low impact. You get a lot of strength and aerobic benefits without all the residual negatives. That's for another show. And for those of you that are listening to this and do a live podcast, please go over to the YouTube channel. And when you get to this part of the show, I've got a graphic illustration that we're going to have up. As you go through your modalities of exercise, for those of you that follow us and you ride a motorcycle, the motorcycle, because of the weight of it, the velocity of it, you're offsetting, you're pushing and pulling, heart rate is always going to be at the highest. Then if you use cross training like mountain bike, a gravel bike, a road bike, your heart rate's going to be a little bit lower than it is on the motorcycle. If you use an elliptical or use, concept 2 is going to be like, it'll be motorcycle, gravel bike, and concept 2. Those two tend to be quite high. Then it'll go road bike, then maybe elliptical, and then go all the way down to swimming.
Would mountain bike be in the gravel bike rowing category? Because I know a lot of our listeners ride mountain bike.
Yeah, because of the fatter tire and because of the elevation changes, it's going to be a little bit higher than it would be for the road bike.
Got it.
But as a general rule of thumb, what we see happening is people will go and spend money on a VO2 max assessment, and then they'll try to take that assessment, the max heart rate number achieved, and they'll apply it to every modality that they're doing, from swimming to being on a motorcycle, from gravel bike to running. It's you're wrong. Okay. Even on these heart rate monitors, you got to remember when you buy these monitors, you're putting in your age, your weight, your height, and then they use some algorithms. These algorithms are really good. It's a great starting point. But if we come back to the beginning of this show together, when you tell me that you want to burn body fat, how do you know when the heart rate is going too high? That's what you want to avoid. So we have a multitude of assessments that we do. Doesn't matter what sport you're in, we have a max heart rate assessment tool that we want you to implement. And then for those of you that are watching here on YouTube, here's the heart rate spreadsheet. And you'll notice that on this particular spreadsheet, I have motorcycle, and then you'll notice I have the bicycle and the Concept 2 rower. It'll go motorcycle, Concept 2 rower, and bicycle, because there tends to be a difference of about 10 to 12 beats. Use that number loosely. That's just based on my 37 years of experience. And what is so cool about that is if I'm trying to improve my lactate tolerance, let's say on the motorcycle, if I know what my max heart rate is on the rower, I can train that range. So zone 3 on the motorcycle, it might be zone 4 or 5 on a rower, because on the motorcycle, you're using, I said that incorrectly. If you're racing out there at the high end of zone 3, bottom end of 4, if you go and you use the rower, you've got to use the rower max heart rate, because you can train that energy system, but you want to do it in the right range. Dan, does that make sense? I feel like I may have confused the listeners on that.
No, it makes sense.
Okay, because if you tell me that you want to burn body fat, now the heart rate spreadsheet does the exact opposite. It puts a governor on you and says, hey, if you go above this number, you're going to trickle in more into sugar for fuel and less fat. If you're telling me you want to work on your sprint speed, you got to make sure that the heart rate's getting high enough specific to that form of exercise before that energy system is going to be improved. So what we're talking about in today's show is, hey, you want to burn body fat? Well, let's make sure you're not dehydrated. If you've got yourself properly hydrated, now you're committed to exercise, lift weights, keep the intensity low, enjoy it, right? Now the question is, well, how hard is too hard? That's where the heart rate spreadsheet comes in. Now you have a governor. And for anybody who gives us a shot and you start training at a lower intensity, and if you finish the workout and go, man, that was a little too easy, you nailed it. I know, especially for men, we peacock our feathers up. We're like, man, this has got to be miserable, right? No pain, no gain. Pain is weakness leaving the body. All these cliches that we grew up with is why we have such a high level of chronic fatigue and Epstein-Barr and other fatigue-related diseases. Remember, I'm not reinventing physiology. I'm trying to give a 10,000-foot view on how does physiology integrate with what your desirable outcome is. You think about it almost like 3 verticals. You want to exercise, that's great. Recovery in the middle is going to be food and sleep, and then we can get to your desirable outcome. But if we lose sight of what your desirable outcome was, and or you're using the wrong principles, this is why people are pulling their hair out. They're like, why can I not lose weight? Why am I actually gaining more body fat training? Because you're training too hard on a body that's already stressed. And as you said, Dan, not sleeping enough. I always tell my clients, no matter what sport you enjoy, you're never going to get good at it by doing it. You're never going to get stronger by going to the gym. You're only going to get stronger if you sleep and eat enough to absorb the work that you did. That's why I always put them in a vertical. Most everybody listening to this podcast will be willing to do the work, but are you doing the work at the right intensity and duration? Are you getting enough food and sleep to offset the work that you did? Now we can talk about your incremental improvements.
Well, and I think
unfortunately, with diet, go ahead.
The main thing behind all this, right, is the thing that everybody needs to understand is where their high percentage of body fat is coming from, and why they may be overweight, and how they got there. And the number one reason for that is stress. And I know when we talk about stress, and we've mentioned it multiple times in this podcast, the one thing that we always think about is, oh my gosh, the stress in my life, the stress at work, or the kids, or, the money, or whatever that is, right, is all stress. But there's different quadrants of stress, and I think it's important to understand what those quadrants are. And that's personal stress, professional stress, financial stress, and then athletic stress. And maybe you can break those down for us.
Well, if I can get everybody to grab another piece of paper and just draw a straight line and put a little arrow in the middle, and what you did was you just created a teeter-totter. You just mentioned what I refer to as the 4 quadrants of life: personal, professional, financial, and athletic. every single minute of every day, our listeners are in one of those 4 quadrants, sometimes together, right? And then on the other side of it, the only thing that can help you balance stress, because when you look at the size of that box, I want you to look at the size that you wrote on your piece of paper. The box on the right side has to be the same size or you become out of balance. I know that sounds like, again, kind of childish example, but please take it very, very seriously. You can only handle so much stress, but it still equates to 100%. So if you're in a bad job, your stress, if you're going to look at it on a scale of 100%, your stress might be eating up 80% of your attention. You don't like your job, you don't get paid enough money. There's a lot of attributes to it that's just making you're wearing yourself out. You're kind of like a hamster on a treadmill. What if you found out, we can look at and adjust those quadrants, but my point to you is when I asked you to write down or create a box, and on the left-hand side, take that big box and cut it into 4s and put personal, professional, financial, and athletic, I hope you wrote the same size box on the other side, and that only has 2 categories, food and sleep. So again, very easy illustration. If your stress is superseding your ability to counterbalance it, you're not getting enough food and sleep, guess what? You're going to gain more body fat. You can eat like a bird, you can train like a madman or woman, you can do whatever you want. You're out of balance, you're going to gain more body fat. We can get into high levels of cortisol, we can look at cortisol levels, that's another subject for another show. But what I find so intriguing is look at the size of the box that you wrote. And my goal for you is let's increase the size of that box by 10% this year. You've got more money, your relationship is killing it, you're loving your job, you're leaner, and you're faster athletically. I think every one of our listeners would love to have all 4 quadrants bigger. Well, if I'm going to help you, if my desire is to help you increase the size of that stress box on the left, I want you to understand the right side's got to grow by 10% as well. You can't go from 4 hours of sleep, you can't run on 4 hours of sleep and expect that the success side of the equation is going to grow. You've got to get enough sleep, 7 hours, 8 hours. If you're getting 4, give me 4.5. I'm not saying go 4 to 8. That, like you said, Dan, that's a glass house ideology.
Can you sleep too much?
No.
Okay.
No. Let me say that. I don't want, because somebody may have a child that's sitting down in their basement, at 28 years old, still sleeping 18 hours a day. It's all about balance. If you're going to work and or school, if you're building if you're contributing, I always say, Dan, you and I talked about this off the air, I think everybody, if they stopped and looked at their 24 hours, how much are you contributing to the man? I know, and this is not a political statement, but are you taking care of your family? Are you doing a good job at work? Are you being a productive citizen? Are you being a good partner? Are you contributing? Are you growing? Are you doing things? If you are, then you probably need to get at least 8 to 9 hours of sleep. But sleep 10 hours and then sit and watch TV for 5 hours and then lurch off the government, not a good environment to go after. Yes,
Agreed.
then that much sleep is too much. But that's where I always like to use a teeter-totter. You may get really excited about your athleticism. Let's make sure it doesn't cannibalize your relationship. Let's make sure that your athleticism doesn't bury your finances where now your mountain bike's worth more than your truck,
Sure.
That's what we don't want to see happen. And just a little footnote, this entire pod is talking about wanting to drop unwanted body fat. If you have high cholesterol and you have high body fat, you'd be surprised if you get rid of anything that's white in color, white potatoes, French fries, potato chips, white bread, you'll notice that your body fat will drop almost immediately.
Now you're asking a lot, Coach Robb. You're asking a lot.
Well, but here's what I'm hoping is the people that are listening to this, either in a podcast format or in a long form on YouTube, the idea here is many people won't tell you that high levels of triglycerides are a big culprit for high levels of body fat. And there's a lot of science that goes into that. But if you want to start noticing a difference in the way that your intimate clothing fit, start cutting out everything white just as a starting point. And then try to add a little bit of exercise and make sure it's low intensity. And then make sure you get enough sleep. And then let's get this balancing act dialed in, very, very important.
The other thing is the nutrition stress. You want to make sure that you're eating enough, because if you're not eating enough, it's going to slow down your metabolism. We've learned that. And then the quality of food that you're eating, there's no nutrient density if you're not eating good quality food. So when we put all that together.
Well, I get hit up with this quite a bit. They're like, well, what should I eat? Very simple. Walk in the grocery store, shop the perimeter, and get out. Because what is it that you're going to find there? Fruits, vegetables, and some form of protein. If you're a strict vegan, you're going to find the tofu in those areas. If you're lacto-ovo vegetarian, you've got your eggs and you've got your dairy product. If if you're a carnivore, guess what? You've got your seafood department, your meat department, your deli department, your fruits, your vegetables, your dairy. Everything you need is in the perimeter of the store. And then simply just eat every couple hours, because that keeps your blood sugar levels a little bit more stabilized. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about nutritional timing and stuff in a future show. But that right there, my friends, is a wrap on how do you legitimately drop body fat, reduce stress first and foremost. That's the big parachute. When you do decide to exercise, make sure that you're training at the right intensity. Make sure it's accurate for you. Make sure that you have an incredible amount of knowledge, and because I can't create confidence in you. You getting results is going to create confidence in the process and the system. Because like I said, I can't take credit for creating physiology and nutrition. For some of you that may be new to this, I had the privilege of racing as an athlete in the triathlon world as a junior development athlete at the Olympic Training Center. So a lot of the stuff that I share with you guys comes directly from there. And the reason why I bring it up is when you're at the Olympic Training Center, you recognize that they're only there to get the best out of the human body. There are no agendas. There are no, like they always say, they can't fib the numbers. The numbers are a byproduct of knowledge that's applied, and then consistent evaluation. And that's really what our entire platform is all about. So, Dan, I appreciate you taking the time today to do this first podcast, because I hope now we've built the framework of how to truly lose body fat.
Yeah, and just to recap it, it's eat more often, get quality sleep, reduce your stress. And there's one last one, Coach Robb, that I think we should maybe touch on just real quickly, and that is getting your blood work done. Making sure that you're, or understanding of what your blood looks like, and monitoring that, and then also getting it done again once you've started cleaning up your diet and working out to make sure that things are looking the way they should be.
Yeah. I want the listeners to stop and think about the fact that your blood work is literally your blueprint. And as we said at the beginning of the webinar, the podcast here, nothing's going to tell you the truth like blood work. You can't run from the numbers. We're fortunate enough, we have Complete Med Solutions. I've been very involved in the development of this company because I am very frustrated with what our listeners have to go through to just get a full panel evaluation done, because you don't want to go in and get an incomplete panel. I know it may sound like I'm spinning a lot of words, but we've had people that have gone to the doctor, gotten blood work, and it really doesn't look at enough variables to say, what is the state of health? Notice I didn't say performance. What's the state of health of this individual? Well, if you're coming to our offices and you're declaring that you're very, very tired, well, if you have a low RBC count, red blood cell count, you're not carrying oxygen. You're going to be very lethargic. If you're lacking B vitamins, B6 and B12, those are your energy vitamins, you're going to be lacking energy. If your thyroid's not functioning properly, we can look at your iodine levels. I don't do it. That's outside of my wheelhouse. I'm not licensed to do that. The company that I work with, Complete Med Solutions, we're fortunate enough to have them as a sponsor of the show. What we've done with them is I've asked for a commitment of no more than 14 days for somebody to get a script. You purchase the service. Within 24 hours, you get a script to get your blood drawn. You get the blood drawn. It gets to our staff. Our staff uploads it. And within 14 days of the day you purchase it, you'll have a telemedic conference. Because of what you just said, Dan, you need to have your blood work drawn. We have our elite athletes do it once a quarter. I know it's not enjoyable. I absolutely scared to death of needles. I still get mine done once a quarter because, like we said earlier, what your blood work is sitting here today is a byproduct of the exercise and the food that you've eaten for the 6 months before it. So if I check that every 3 to 4 months, if I'm out of range, I can make adjustments to my nutrition. I can eat more, because a lot of you guys may or may not know. If you're new, I wouldn't expect you to know this, but I own my own supplement company as well. But I'm here to tell you, please don't take supplements until we deem them necessary. When you get your blood work, why are you out of range? Either number one, you're burning everything you're consuming too fast. Number two, you can't get enough of what you're taking in to offset. So you're burning it too fast. So you need to pull back the training, or you need to eat more. If you're doing both of those and you're still out of range, the third one would be maybe you have gut issues and maybe you're not absorbing what you're actually eating. If those three things, your gut is absorbing correctly, you're eating as much as you can, that's when supplementation would come in. But if you are running a deficit of 3 or 4 micro or macronutrients, and we can identify it, and then you make adjustments in your nutrition and we adjust the training, and we do that again in 12 weeks, we know if we're in that straight narrow line, especially for somebody who's really struggling with low energy. Go to the doctor and they say, man, everything's fine, Dan, don't worry about it, you're good. And you're like, but dude, you know yourself well enough, our listeners know themselves well enough, and I get it, the older we get, the better we were, right? I'm not insinuating that. What I am saying is, you know yourself, and it is frustrating when you got to jump through a primary physician and a specialist, and it takes 3 or 4 months. And then when you do get the blood work, it takes a week or two to actually be seen by somebody. Well, the ship has sailed. You're not getting a snapshot of your current level of what your blood work telling you. So you're exactly right.
And I know for like my personal healthcare provider, if I get blood work done, their normal range is very large. Yeah. And it's not very specific. So I think this is where getting your blood work done through Med Solutions, it's more specific and it's looked at it with a finer comb, right?
That's exactly it. So no matter where you're at as a listener, if you're committed to your health, why are you being compared against somebody who does not take their health serious? You know, Dan, people our age, they smoke, they drink, they do all kinds of things. Okay. So my blood work is going to be evaluated against theirs, and I exercise 30 hours a week. I haven't eaten a fried food in 35 years. I don't ever declare to live in a glass house. But my point being is that our listeners, think about how dedicated you are to your health and wellness. We all can say we could do better. Please don't beat yourself up. But you're going to tell me your blood work, if you enjoy riding motorcycles or doing triathlons or running, your blood work's being compared to someone your age that doesn't do anything? How does that make any sense?
Yeah,
and that was
it doesn't.
The genesis behind. I spent the last 5 years trying to get this company off the ground because I see a need. We had a client who insurance disapproved a full panel, and they got hit with a $1,300 invoice. I'm like, what? Yeah, because they were told it was going to be covered by insurance and it wasn't, and then they get hit with a bill. And I'm like, all right, that's it. This is crazy. People are just trying to be in front of their health, and they get met with nothing but resistance. And that's just what the healthcare is as we know it pretty much globally. After talking, I've had the privilege of traveling the last 10 years doing performance camps internationally. And unfortunately, America's not the only one that would rather wait until it's broken and try to fix it instead of being proactive. And that's just the approach. Even this whole podcast today is about helping people get proactive about the truth on how to lose body fat. Now that you're educated, let's apply the resources and get on top of it. So,
Coach Robb, we've covered a lot today. This is a big topic for everybody. During this podcast, we've talked about Complete Med Solutions, some of your energy fuel supplements, things like that. Where can our listeners go to find more information on that?
Yeah, if you're new to me and everything, I would encourage you to go coachrobb.com, find your sport of choice. Outside of that, if you're looking for training programs, doesn't matter what sport, we're in all of them, literally. Go to Coach Robb Store. And by the way, Coach Robb has got 2 B's in it, coachrobbstore.com. And that can get you everything from training programs to, we have digital bundles, we have cookbooks, we have 5 books on Amazon. I'm not here trying to peddle products. Everything that we've put together is because of what you have asked for, what your frustrations are. Hey, what should I make for a snack? We have a snack book. Hey, I like smoothies. Do you have any suggestions? We have a smoothie book. We have 3 cookbooks. A couple of them are inspired by our travels around the world. So some of our good friends, if you like some different types of food, it's all there. But it's all made with real raw food, and we don't shy away from eating a lot of good, healthy food. So
I'm going to selfishly plug the energy fuel and the protein because you and I have had multiple conversations about this. I don't like any of that stuff personally. It all tastes like crap to me. But you said, Dan, please try this energy fuel. In fact, you sent some to me. I love it. It tastes fantastic. And so does the protein. Protein for me is like, I won't touch any of it, but your protein is is spot on. So I love that stuff. Thank you so much, Coach Robb, for episode 1. This has been a good one. Thank you guys so much for listening in, tuning in on YouTube. We'll be back for round 2 shortly.
We'll see you soon. Thank you so much. Take care.